This time on Speedy Bill, things go a bit nuts. And I go off the rails. Yes, that's right, and if you haven't guessed by now, or if you didn't watch my last video, and if you haven't, why not? I want answers. I'm going to be fitting some Jass Performance stainless steel chassis rails to the MX-5, hopefully protect them a bit more and help with some chassis stiffness. Before I do that though, I'm going to address an issue that's been bugging me for a few weeks, and it's something any of you with an MX-5 might be familiar with if you fitted LED Jeep headlights. That is that as soon as you turn the ignition on, for some reason the headlights get a permanent 12 volts and they pop up and won't go back down. I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix this. This may not work for some of you, but this is how I'm going to do it, so let's get to it. So to start with the troubleshooting, we need to come to the passenger side of the engine bay, and normally you'd have a bracket with a load of relays on here. I've got rid of mine, but what you need to look for is this HD22 retractor relay. This is the one that controls the headlight motors. If you pull that out, they won't come up at all, but they will still light up. What we need to look for is this red and white wire here. That's the one we're interested in. I did a couple of tests and found out that that's the one that provides the 12 volt signal to pop the headlights up. So what I'm going to be doing is basically just putting a switch in here. So I'm going to cut that wire, run it to a switch that I've got on the dash, and hopefully that should solve the issue. So here are the tools you're going to need for this job. We're going to need a sharp knife possibly, wire snippers, automatic wire strippers, solder, heat shrink or electrical tape depending on what you've got, some appropriately spec'd wire, and a soldering iron. So as always, the first thing you need to do before you start in on any electrical work is disconnect the battery. I've already done that, so I'm now going to remove this relay, just get it out of the way, and what I need to see is how much slack I've got to play with. I can see there's a cable tie holding some of it back there, so I'm just going to snip that off carefully. There we go. Just thread this down through so I've got a bit more slack to play with, and I'm going to unwrap some of this tape here so I've got a bit more cable to play with. What you don't want to do is cut it too close to anything and leave yourself with too short a length of cable to work with. So I'm going to get my knife and very carefully just start you want to be careful that you don't cut through any of the cables. There we go. So now I've got a better amount of cable to work with. Now for the scary part. I'm going to cut that wire. So next I'm going to take the wire strippers, which I recently learned I've been using wrong my entire life. I'm left-handed. As with most things in the world, these are made for right-handers, and I always wondered why I struggled to use them. I've now found out, so I now have to adapt myself and use them that way up. So I'm going to strip the ends of these wires that I just snipped. There we go. Next, just twist the ends so they're nice and neat. And what I'm going to do next is tin the ends. That's just letting some solder run into the ends of the wire here so that when it comes to soldering the new pieces on, it's a lot easier. Get my soldering iron, and I'm going to start by just dripping some onto the end of the iron. So I've got a nice little puddle there, and hold that under my wire, let that heat up, run the solder into the ends, and there we go, we've got a nicely tinned end. There we go, easy as that. So that's what you should end up with once you've tinned it. You see the solder in the end there, just gives a much better and much easier connection when it comes to putting new wires on. The next thing I want to do is run my cables from these joints to the switch in the dashboard. I have no idea how long these need to be, so I'm going to cut two equal lengths that I know will be longer than I need. I'm going to then solder them onto here, run them through the bulkhead, behind the dash, to the switch on my side, crimp some terminals onto the end, then I can connect it all up, reconnect the battery and test it all. Okay, so I've got my pieces of wire here. What I took the time to do was every so often just put a piece of tape around them to keep them together. Keeps it much neater and easier to keep track of them. The next thing you're going to need to do is get it from this side of the engine bay to the inside of the car. There's a couple of ways you can do this. There's all these grommets here that aren't used. I'm going to try and use this big one down here. And what I've done, I've just taped those ends completely. I'm going to just make it a bit easier and push it through. There we go. So what I'm going to do is push as much of this through as I can, so that hopefully some of it will find its way somewhere into the passenger footwell area, because there's nothing I dislike more than rolling around on my back in the footwell trying to find wires, especially in this MX-5. So I'm going to go and try and find that end. Back in 5 minutes. Okay, so after pulling some contortions, I've now pulled a fair amount of that wire through, left myself enough slack to work with. So again, we're going to call on some strippers. Not that kind. Strip the ends. There we go. Again, we're going to tin the ends of these. Take a bit of heat shrink, just going to cut it in half, don't need the whole thing, and then get those out of the way. Once those are cooled down, we can slide the heat shrink over the ends of the cable. You want to remember to do this first, because it's impossible to do once you've joined it together. And then literally we're going to solder one end to one end, the other end to the other, then we can run it to this switch in the dashboard. Put the two ends together and apply some heat. There we go, one nice strong joint. And there we have it. And once you've got your heat shrink over the joint, you just need to apply a little bit of heat. You can use the body of the soldering iron for this. I prefer to use a lighter. Just give it a little scorch, not too. Nice protected soldered joint. Going to wrap all this up, get some tape around it, get it all neat, put it back together, and then we'll go inside to finish this installation. Okay, so we're all finished up in the engine bay, so we've come to the relative uncomfortableness of the passenger side footwell. You can see where the wires come through here. Got a nice good length there. We need to get from here all the way over to that little switch there, which is earmarked for the pop-ups. So I'm going to try and feed the cable from this side of the dash to the other through this rat's nest of cables, and I'll hopefully get it through there without losing my mind. Okay, so here we are at the switch panel. This is the switch we're interested in. Got my ends of my wire here. It's obviously a bit longer than it needs to be, so what I'm going to do is just leave myself a little bit extra. I'm going to cut it off about here. Get rid of that. And with these switches, they have spade terminals, so I'm going to be putting these onto the ends. Pop those on there. Give them a squeeze. Make sure that, there we go, and the same on this one. There we go. I'm going to connect these to the back of my switch. Doesn't matter which way around they go. Doesn't have polarity. There we go. Connect up the battery and test it. Okay, so I've reconnected the battery. I'm just going to make sure that the lights work. Okay, so they do come up with the switch. Still got lights, etc. All that nonsense. So let's turn the ignition on. No lights. Let's try. And there they are. The only problem with this is that the lights will not come up when you put the headlights on. They will come up to flash, but if you want your headlights on as well, you are going to have to flick that, but to be honest, that's not really much more work. I'm quite happy with that. It was a nice simple job. So let's get to the main reason we're here, which is installing those chassis rails. So here's what you get with the chassis rail kit from Jass Performance. You get a left and a right hand chassis rail. All the mounting hardware, I've laid mine out and counted everything because I dropped the bag on the floor and it split, so I wanted to make sure everything is there. You get a very comprehensive instruction sheet which tells you everything you need. Tools wise, quite simple. You need a 10mm deep socket, 13mm, you need 2 of those, an 8mm drill bit, and a drill. So, as with all good stories, this one starts with jacking up your car. So I'm going to get it nice and high so I've got plenty of space to work on it, and then we can get on with it. Next thing I'm going to have to do, remove the seats, lift up the carpets so that I can get access to underneath without drilling through anything. Right, let's go underneath the car. Okay, so once you get under the car, there are a couple of things you're going to want to look at. Namely, it's the condition of the chassis rails. Are they bent outwards? When they get squashed, they can flare a bit. The best way to test it is to grab the chassis rail for that side and try and put it in place. If you find that you're struggling to push it on, then chances are you're going to have to use a persuader. Here's mine. So what you want to do is find where your chassis rails are bulging outwards. I can see here there's been an impact and it's pushed it outwards. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep doing that until I can get the chassis rail over the original chassis rail. Okay, so after a fair bit of persuading, this is what it should look like. You want it as close to the floor as possible and as far forwards in the car as possible, but still able to lie flat. Next thing, we need to drill some holes. So we're going to start at the front with an 8mm drill bit. One. And 2. And before we crack on with the rest, I'm just going to put some bolts in here to hold everything in place. So when it comes to bolting these chassis rails in place, what you'll need a bolt, a large washer, a small washer, and a nut. The large washer goes inside the car, and we're going to have the bolts pointing downwards so that nothing protrudes up into the carpet. So I'll just push those through. And then the small washer goes on next, and then the nut. This is where you need to pull some contortions. It can often be helpful to have a friend with you to do this, but I'm on my own, so what I'm going to have to do is reach over the top and under the bottom and try and get this nut on. $13mm for this. Yep. So that's the first 2 holes drilled, and those loosely bolted in place just to stop it falling on my head. So I'm going to crack on now and drill the rest of them. Okay, so that's all the holes for this side drilled out. The next thing I'm going to want to do is put some rust protection on the bits that I've just drilled, and then we can pull the film off, which hopefully is going to be all in one go. Okay, so when you're done, this is what you should end up with. Nice line of bolts. There's only one I wasn't able to get a washer onto. I suppose it depends where you put the chassis rail. There we go. And if we come underneath, see a nice shiny rail, flat against the floor, protecting and stiffening the chassis for years to come. Now I just need to do the whole thing on the other side. Okay, so I've flipped the car around. We're now on the driver's side. There's a couple of differences with this side, namely that you'll have to be dealing with the brake lines in close proximity to the chassis rails. So to that end, Jass Performance provide you with some brand new stainless steel brake line brackets. So we're going to have to remove these two clips first. Now they're held on with one on each one, a 10mm bolt. We'll start with this one, just try and scrape off some of the undercoating. Push that on there nice and gently. Just, there we go, it's starting to go. Oh, to go. Okay, that's one out. So next up we'll remove these. I think you have to there are plastic clips which holds the brake lines together, so you want to be careful not to break the clip. I'm just going to get a grip on this, and what you should be able to do, if you move the brake lines, rotate this, there we go, and then it comes off just like that. Do the other one, and then we can get the chassis rail in. Okay, so it's now time to try and get the other chassis rail into place. So to do this, we're going to have to slide it up under the brake line, put it in like that, and then without too much force, there we go. I think a bit of persuading is required. Well, after a bit of effort, you should have it in place. Let's drill some more holes. Okay then, so I've just finished up drilling and bolting this thing on. It's a bit of a fiddle with the brake and fuel lines running alongside. You do have to kind of tweak them out the way a little bit. Main thing you want to be careful of is that you don't damage any of them with the drill or with a screwdriver or a ratchet. The main thing to note on this side, because clearance is at a premium, you put the bolts in that way rather than that way, and there are 4 shorter ones that come with the kit which you want to put as close to the front as possible. This stops them poking through the carpet and feeling them when you've got your feet there. So the final thing we need to do to finish this install is to put the brake line brackets back in. So and we can push it up into its hole, and then you find in the kit you get these 2 smaller stainless steels, and you want to pop them into the bolt hole and get yourself your 10mm. Get something in your eye. Anyway, you get the idea. I'll finish getting this bolted in and then job's done. Well, there you go. That's how you fix your pop-up headlights and install Jass Performance stainless steel chassis rail reinforcers. Next thing I'm going to do is get this thing out on the road, take it up some twisties and see how it feels, see if they've actually made any difference. I hope you enjoyed this video. Plenty more where that came from. We are on Facebook, Speedy Bill and Friends. I'm on Instagram, Speedy Bill. Like, subscribe, comment, hit that bell so that when we upload videos you'll get to see them as soon as they're up. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. See you again. This time on Speedy Bill, things go a bit nuts. Oh no! Broke the bag. I'm going to do that, but first I'm going to do something else. Before I start on that though, there's an issue I want to address, and that is that my headlights pop up as soon as I turn the ignition on and won't go down at all. So I've figured out what I'm... You absolute wanker! Hello? Before I do that though, I'm going to address... Buckles. Don't use that one. So let's get to it. Use that one! Well, there you go. That's how you fix... No. Well, there you go. That's how you fix your pop-ups and install... What a waste of time this is.